That's the first test if you can get up on the stage. Guys, you've seen me talk on many, many occasions, and you've seen me talk about cannabis and various other matters. I'll be the first to say I didn't start as a cannabis lawyer. I started as a bankruptcy and restructuring economist and then became involved in cannabis in the old days of the Hemp Act. And since then, it's become a fantastic part of the practice, which has evolved into wellness, health, and medical. And I think that gives you a theme for this presentation. The other thing I need to say, being a good lawyer, is there's no such thing as free advice, and this is a friendly discussion. So let's move on. Was Thailand the first country in Asia to allow recreational cannabis? No. It never allowed recreational cannabis. It decriminalized a plant, but it never legislated to allow the unrestricted use of cannabis for adult use or recreational use. In 2018, Thailand took the bold steps to decriminalize a plant which previously was the mainstay of many economies. The old hemp plant. Hemp was the mainstay of the old traditions of Navy, as in ropes, and the criminalization only came around recent times. So why did the country do it? What happened? And what is it going to do about it now? So what happened was cannabis, the plant, was removed as a scheduled product and decriminalized, meaning that criminal prosecutions would not be engaged with or started against people who were in possession of the cannabis plant. That allowed some interesting things to happen, which you could say would only happen in Thailand. Once the plant was decriminalized, prisoners in jail were released who were jailed for cannabis crimes and given back their cannabis to take home with them. So we had some really interesting things happening about that time. The decriminalization was meant to stimulate a part of the economy associated with tourism and wellness and Thai traditional medicines, rather than generally invoke a Californian atmosphere of adult use. So this is the background that we need to work within. You've heard this, and we need to talk about this, and we need to understand what a law is. A law is something that people want and something that can be enforced. You don't have those two things coming together, and you've got anarchy, you've got a mess, you've got a disaster in the waiting. And we're going to talk about how in this period of decriminalization, the law and the enforcement didn't marry up. The international trends around cannabis are really guided by a piece of paper that was signed back in 1961 under extreme pressure from the US, called the Single Convention on Narcotics. And in that schedule, cannabis was rated in the same category as heroin and other addictive drugs. That was at the express behest of the US government, because they were facing enormous pressures at that time to control issues within the country associated with the abuse of certain drugs. The cannabis regime was enforced by the International Narcotics Control Board, which was based in Vienna. And the Narcotics Control Board had this unenviable task of enforcing a regime which is both rigid and uncompromising. So naturally, there was pushback. And the pushback in the regime firstly led to the rescheduling of cannabis in '71, from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, still a restricted narcotic. And then in recent times, countries such as, the first being Uruguay, and then Canada, and then other countries such as states in the US, and now recently Germany, legislating to allow the free adult use of cannabis as and when required, but within certain parameters. Does that not offend this international convention? Well, there are a number of loopholes in the International Convention that most of these countries have worked within. the most notorious being the medical exemption. So if you can place cannabis in a category of scientific research or medical convention, then you're able to prescribe under the Act. The other way around it, such as the way Uruguay did it, is they resigned from the convention, they withdrew from the convention, and then re-entered the convention with the exception of cannabis. So there was a number of ways countries got around these prohibitions, but it's still imperfect because we have a regime that says if you do not follow a universal standard in the dealing with narcotics, you will be prescribed, you will be called out, and there are sanctions in place under the Act that can be used against countries who want to go an independent route. So, the International Narcotics Control Board came out 2 years ago and said, guys, this is all a mess. We don't know how to control it. We know that many countries want to decriminalize, legalize, and even legalize the use of cannabis, but we can't do it within the convention. What can we do? Well, many of them recognized that they were, in a sense, powerless to intervene. Particularly ironic is one of the largest movers to the adult use of cannabis was the very same country that was the proponent for the criminalization of cannabis, being the US. But the US has invoked various means of getting around the conventions, and none of it is consistent. And the International Narcotics Control Board came down as, we realize this is an issue. And the issue is not so much the nations getting around the prohibition on adult use of cannabis. Medical use of cannabis is fine, so we're going to put that aside for later on, but the adult use. But the fact is that if it's not properly regulated and controlled, it can lead to knock-on effects which weren't anticipated. And what the report focused on was some of the issues that have been seen to occur where cannabis is deregulated or legalized within a framework that isn't robust. They point to a number of problems. They quote an 8-fold increase in admissions for cannabinoid overdoses and dependencies, quadrupling of cannabis-related psychiatric disorders, and also issues on the potency and composition of illicit cannabis products and synthetics, causing additional concerns. I'm old enough to remember Thai stick and Thai cannabis from university days. And if that had a potency of 8% THC, the growers will probably confirm something of that. That was a pretty good smoke. These days, you can walk to a dispensary and see 27, 28% THC. And no one knows what that does in the long term. It's a trend that's increasing. And the growers are better to talk about this, but the demand is, in Thailand at least, not a marketing demand, but sales by the highest THC content. And we can talk about that at length. It's not a legal issue, it's a marketing issue. So, brace for the impact. So Thailand stepped back and said, okay, we've decriminalized the plant. What happened? Oh my Buddha, I didn't think this was going to happen. What's happened? You walk down any street and there is statistically more cannabis dispensaries than 7-Elevens in Thailand. There is 6,500 legal dispensaries, probably the same number illegal dispensaries. There's 10,500 7-Elevens, so the statistics holds true. Why? Why did this happen? What happened? So if I'm going to sit back, and I'm Mr. Anatin who set up this regime, and he said, well, I only wanted medical. What happened? Well, the simple answer is Thailand did and does have the laws to regulate cannabis. It always did have. As I said, a law is what the people want and what's enforced. The people didn't want some of those laws, and no one enforced them. So we've heard this talk about the Cannabis Act, and we'll get onto that in a minute and what it means. But in fact, it's simply a will of enforcement that we're talking about now, not a change in the regime. So, one of the issues that occurred was that, firstly, we decriminalized the plant. And decriminalizing the plant, someone forgot that cannabis is actually the bud of the plant. So that was the first problem. We decriminalized that. So you can possess the whole plant, you can dry the plant, you can sell the plant, you can use it. It's a traditional medicine, but also it makes a good smoke. So, okay, that was part one. Part two was when these dispensaries were set up. They started looking at other ways to extend their business. Gummies, edibles, various other tinctures, all of those which were never intended to have been part of this decriminalization crept in. Also, the lack of enforcement meant, what was the payback for the Thai people? This was sold to the Thai nation as a way of increasing prosperity in the poorest parts of Thailand, in the northeast. Did any of this happen? In fact, some statistics say more than 50% of cannabis that you see in the shops has been illegally imported. So this didn't flow through. Also, the other repercussion of chasing high THC levels that people have forgotten is this is not conducive to outdoor grow or even greenhouse grow. They've moved now to a growing medium, indoor grow, which is prohibitive for the average Thai farmer. So it produced none of the benefits they were looking for, and in fact led to a number of the criticisms the Thai country is facing with this unrestricted growth in cannabis. I went to a lecture some 7 months ago by the editor for Nikkei, and I asked her, what do you think about cannabis and the cannabis laws from an editorial point of view? And her response was quite interesting. She said, if you look at Asia as a whole, Asia is as a whole extremely anti-drug. And there's some extremely draconian laws enforcing the drug laws. In Singapore, last count was 5 people were sentenced to death and were actually executed for cannabis possession or sales. To go to China, where it's a regular occurrence. So in a sense, Thailand stood out because of this unrestricted decriminalization of the plant and the lack of enforcement of the follow-on issues, e.g. other products related, THC-related products. So Thailand, in her view, and I'll just quote the editor of the Nikkei, is embarrassed by its Asian community, by this current situation. The second thing is the Thai people. And I hear a lot of people with dispensaries and grows, everyone wants it, everyone needs this. The second issue is, at the last elections, it's more than 70% of the votes, I think more than 80% of the votes, voted for parties that were rabidly anti-cannabis. You can't say the Thai people support cannabis when 80% of the people voted for parties that part of their campaign was putting cannabis back as a narcotic. So therefore, the Thai people have also spoken that they're not happy with the current regime, putting additional pressure on the government to do something about it. The current government came in, and one of the first things it did was announce that it would, quote unquote, put the genie back in the bottle and move cannabis back as a narcotic. Was it a smart thing to do? Was it a smart thing to say? If you're a politician and you're looking for votes, it was probably okay. If you're a politician in Thailand with what you say is not what you do, it was probably okay. But there was tremendous thought that went into, okay, what does that mean? Don't forget, we had a Cannabis Act, a draft Cannabis Act sitting in Parliament, and the Parliament refused to pass it. Follow up to January and February this year, that same act with a few changes went back to Parliament, to Cabinet actually, and they've refused to accept it. So we're in a bit of a state in Thailand. We've got anarchy, we've got confusion in the cannabis industry. We've got a government that's told the population, hey guys, this is bad for you, we're really going to police this. And you've got the practicalities, that is, this is an extremely lucrative industry with many implications in wellness and health and medicine that need to be looked at. So we're now at an inflection point. What do you do? How do you manage this? And what's likely to happen? The rest of this presentation is a fantasy. And a fantasy is in the sense that no one has a draft law. When I was asked to present, I think for sure there's going to be a draft law. That was a year ago. For sure something's going to be in place. And it's still being kicked around. My guys who are related to people who are making decisions are telling me we will have a law. It'll be in another 2 or 3 months' time. My next question was, when are they going to enforce the law? And inshallah, no one knows. It'll happen when it happens. So we're not sure when the law will be enforced or how it'll be enforced. As I said, law people want a law that's enforced. If you don't have that, you don't have a law. So, a recap. Never free for all. Never meant to be adult use. Always meant to be medical, but none of that ever happened. So you can criticize one or the other. You can criticize the government. You can criticize the entrepreneurs who've taken up the loophole. But what they do to a large extent, but not completely, is legal and within the areas of decriminalization. So Thailand really is at a turning point. It has 3 options. Make it a narcotic, shut down the production, shut down the grows and the dispensaries. In fact, turn back the clock 10 years. The second option is to produce a regime that provides tighter controls and the use of cannabis under medical prescription. What does that mean? It's always the big question. What does a California medical card get you? What do the other medical uses of cannabis get you? Okay? And the final one is stay where you are. Don't do anything. That's traditionally a Thai solution as well. So don't write the last one off, please. Doing nothing is also a solution. So the first one, is it going to happen? Are they going to put the genie back in the bottle? Are they going to make it a narcotic and they're going to close down the dispensaries and grow sites? I don't think so, for a number of reasons. One, people have become, in a sense, used to the availability of cannabis. They have, in a sense, become accustomed to the income it provides and the tourism it provides. And think about the time where it was decriminalized, when Thailand was suffering from a tourism downturn. So it became free publicity. And the other reason is that as this evolves, there's a lot of money, international money and local money, going towards evolving cannabis into a much more sophisticated product. A product that provides medical, therapeutic, and wellness uses in addition to adult use, which is the simplest to provide. So where are we going to come? How does the government meet its commitments to make cannabis medical again? Like Donald Trump, make America great again, make cannabis illegal again. Anyway, so we've got this conundrum, and they've got the conundrum of the economics. Thailand's economy, regardless, is not the best. Tourism is not back to where it wants to be. And there's a number of factors that the government has on it to balance budgets and that, and keep on increasing tourism and economic development. So how do they do that, where they pull the rug under billions of dollars of investment, millions, not billions of dollars investment in an industry because they made a mistake? Who's going to believe them in the future? So we've got an issue here in the government. So how do we get through this conundrum of keeping the people happy, keeping the powers that be happy, keeping the investors happy, keeping the international community happy, keeping our Asian partners happy? Okay, so we think that recreational use, this is my fortune telling of what's probably will happen. Recreational use will not be as free and easy as we've got it now. There'll be some sort of controls on it. There always was controls on it, but they were never enforced. For example, the smoking of cannabis could only be done in private locations or a specially designated smoking room. I visited with some colleagues 3 or 4 dispensaries yesterday to to introduce them to Thailand, none of them comply with the requirements. So we have a law, it's not enforced. The second thing for recreational use of cannabis, how do we have recreational use when we've got edibles with high THC content that are not registered? Well, the answer is edibles, if they do exist in the future, need to be registered the same as any other medical product. They move from a food supplement to a medical product and undergo a similar registration. And they may have a more restrictive area where they can be provided or prescribed. And that may be in association with hospitals, clinics, whatever, but they're not going to be over the counter. And that's a reasonable way of going to limit the recreational use. The other way to limit it, which is set out in the draft regulations and makes extreme amount of sense, is to regulate the grow side. Once you regulate the grow side in the industry, you regulate the demand and you regulate the offtake. So what is going to happen is the current disaster of a registration system called Bukancha, meaning to grow cannabis, is going to be replaced with a system which is more rigorous. As an example, and not to be quoted outside the room, I, for fun, registered 2 million plants in my backyard, and the system took it. So obviously it's not a smart system, nor was it ever intended to do anything more than notify that you're growing cannabis. They're going to probably need to move that to a system where there is a registration and licensing process and a number of protocols, not the least being GACP, Good Agricultural Collection Practice, being put into place under the grow facilities. That means people growing in their backyard, in their attic, in their carport are probably not going to be licensed. That means those who meet GACP requirements are probably going to be serious players in the industry. That one simple line of legislation and requirements, which appears in the Draft Act, will limit the abilities to provide recreational cannabis to anyone who wants it, because there's a regime in place. Will it stop the legacy market? No. There's still going to be a legacy market, and there's still going to be people growing in their backyards, but they always were. I've been in Thailand 35 years, and 35 years ago, it wasn't that hard to get cannabis, okay? So that's not going to change very much. If you're a legacy grower, you're a legacy grower, but the market is so much smaller. It's a different market. People don't fly to Thailand, hey, I can buy cheap cannabis. They fly to Thailand because it's an experience. And I don't think the fact that there's more restrictions in place will in fact do anything to restrict tourism and the appeal of the regime, of a more liberal regime. The other thing is that with a clear law, the law enforcement authorities, that is those who have to enforce the law, will actually take action. The inflection point was there was a number of people selling cannabis, if one remembers in the early days last year, in Khao San Road. And the police went to the stalls and said, you're not licensed. And the stall owners said to them quite legitimately, what does it mean to be licensed? We don't know. And the police said, you're actually right. We don't know what a license means. And they went away, and it was a public embarrassment. And from that time on, the police said, hey, we're not touching this. This is a political issue. It's not a police issue. It's not an enforcement issue, because we don't know what to enforce. So I think the next law will spell out what's enforceable and what's not enforceable. Okay, prohibiting of smoking of cannabis. One of the things that annoys Thai people the most is people smoking cannabis outside dispensaries, around students, on the public transport. That will be prohibited and more strictly enforced. So I think that one, which is always a law, it always was a law under the Tobacco Act, will now be enforceable. And finally, Thailand will do what it usually does, provide draconian fines and criminal offences for most of these. The Draft Act says if you violate Rule ABC, you will do 5 years in jail or pay a fine of $55 or both. That's the regime that's usually put in place, a huge range of what can happen. But in fact, having a criminal offence means a number of things. Firstly, there's a severity about it. And secondly, if it affects a foreigner, it affects their ability to reside in Thailand. So there's obviously a purpose in having a lot of criminalities around these laws as they come in. So my feeling is that Thailand, and we talked about how Thailand went to Canada and learned from Canada. They obviously didn't learn extremely well. It's cold, people don't like staying there too long, so they just flew in, flew out. They obviously didn't take away a lot of the learnings from the Canadian experience, which now they're coming back to review. Canada has a regime where cannabis is available, but extremely regulated. And Thailand needed to see that the availability and the regulation need to match. The Canadian regime requires a certification, either GACP or GPP certification for growers. Thailand needs to enforce that if they're going to follow the Canadian regime, which they probably will. They'll need permits for exporting, okay? So that's normal. And they will also, and we have, and this is part of the xenophobia, if you like, in Thailand. They've also had a blanket in ban on import of product as well for 5 years, and that dates back to, I think, 2023. But that ban will eventually go away, and there will be a need to regulate imports. As I said, the regulation and the enforcement is a problem. When I said initially 50% of the cannabis sitting in the shops comes from overseas. How did that happen? Lack of enforcement, not lack of law. So we've got all of those issues. Dispensaries, the prediction is on the working group that half or 2/3 of dispensaries may close. And those that remain will morph into a clinic type environment. Does that mean the outlets go away? No, because some of these dispensaries will also morph into wellness and health clinics, will provide an experience which is more encompassing than just buying something at a kiosk. So there'll be changes as well. We also see some liberalization under the industrial hemp regulations, because everyone forgets that cannabis is more than just the smokable variety. There's also an industrial use, and that one is being prioritized as well. So that is likely where things are. Look, if one was to take a crystal ball and see what will happen, we would say that the Thai legislation in its final form will be an Asian version of the Canadian regulations in some form or fashion. People can argue with me more or less. I've seen the draft law, and the draft law gives you no guidance whatsoever. People quote the draft law, and there's massive sections saying that you will not grow cannabis except under the minister's regulations. What's the minister's regulations? Don't know. You will not set up a dispensary except under the regulations prescribed by the minister. Again, don't know. So the act itself, which I've got copies of, tells you nothing at all. So we've got to wait to see how these regulations come into play to know exactly where it's going. But the bet being that Thailand will continue to have a buoyant and growing cannabis industry. Thailand will be able to supply and continue to supply medical cannabis, because you can't export recreational cannabis, medical cannabis to the world. Thailand will continue to lead Asia in its ability to provide a cannabis experience in wellness and health, because that's what Thailand wants to do. It wants to be a wellness and health hub. So, CBD cosmetics, again, very, very limited restrictions. CBD, again, will be the golden child initially, because it has very few restrictions and very few health implications as well. So there'll be some morphing towards more emphasis on the CBD content. Okay, so if I was a cannabis business, what would I do looking at the crystal ball? Well, I think those shops who license will continue to operate. Will they continue to operate profitably is another question, but they will continue to operate within the regulations. On-site cannabis smoking, again, will be heavily restricted. The idea is that adult use will be something that's done privately. As I said, come back to my statement, this was an embarrassment. If you keep the embarrassment rather private, it becomes less of an embarrassment. So there'll be enforcements of where and how you can smoke adult use recreational cannabis. Also to be strict regulations on raw materials used in medical cannabis, and this is coming back to GACP, GMP. GACP was specifically designed to accommodate herbal medical products. Cannabis is a herbal medical product. GACP and the GACP regulations were written for cannabis, basically. So that will be enforced. And then finally, GACP cultivators will have the market, the medical market, open to them. Non-GACP will only have the legacy market open to them. And that may be a viable market or it may be not. It won't be a legal market, but then again, this is going back to the way it was many years ago. Okay, other regulations that we need to know. This one is very important. There always was, and this is the point. I'm wrapping up now. These are regulations that were always in place. And you say, well, how do things happen? You've got a law, it's not enforced. Look at the regulations. You need to register. You need to have a commercial reason. You need to have a prescription for cannabis as a traditional medicine. Never enforced. Other laws, controlled herbs. You need to have registration and licensing and protection and regulations around the growing of controlled herbs. Never enforced. So it's not that a herbal product or herbal medical product were never regulated, and cannabis is a herbal medical product, were never regulated. It was never enforced. So what we're going to see when we say what's the law going to be, it's going to be a law which will be enforceable. That means it's got to be workable. And a law that says no more adult use cannabis is not workable, therefore not enforceable. And that's my theory, is that we're going to see this modified Canadian-esque regime which puts pressure on the growers to perform certain standards and provides an outlet for people who wish to enjoy cannabis in its various forms. GACP, this is the certification requirements. People talk about GMP. It's only if you're moving past the grow stage. But, you know, as I said, it doesn't really matter. Opening clinics, you can read about it. The real outline of this is, and I'm running out of time, of course, is that the dispensaries will remain, the growers will remain. There will be a reorientation of approach and presentation, and there will be a reorientation of perception amongst the Thai community towards cannabis. And that will be probably at the time the Cannabis Act comes in and becomes publicized and enforceable. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much coming up to time, and I think we're taking some questions. Am I right? Oh, after. Okay, that's fine. There we go. Well, I am unfortunately not here this afternoon. I have another event down in Chonburi. But if you do need to call me, scan the code. We're around. We do have a large cannabis and wellness practice, and we're very happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Let's give a big hand to Paul Crosio of Silk Legal Thailand.